Secretary of State Antony Blinken is traveling to Ukraine on Wednesday, where he will meet with President Zelensky to reaffirm the United States' support amid a rise in tensions with Russia. The Russian military recently began withdrawing troops along its border with Ukraine after amassing tens of thousands of troops, raising alarms in the West. Joining me now is Russian opposition politician and Washington Post contributing columnist Vladimir Kara-Murza. He is the survivor of 2 suspected poisonings. It's great to have you with us, Vladimir. Let's talk a little bit about these tensions between Russia and Ukraine. How do you see the military buildup play out among, let's say, for example, the Russian people, while at the same time there is a crackdown on protesters and opposition leaders within that country?
Hello, Evan, and it's good to be on your program. Well, in fact, those 2 angles that you just raised are directly connected to each other. If we look at the modern history of Russia, the domestic repression and the external aggression are always 2 sides of the same coin. We've seen this throughout our modern history. We've seen the reverse correlation as well. When Russia domestically is more open, more liberal, more striving for democracy and the rule of law at home, then it will have a much more friendly and progressive and pro-European foreign policy. But certainly under Vladimir Putin, in the last 21 years that he has been in power, we've seen those 2 parallel tracks. On the one hand, an ever-increasing, an ever-intensifying domestic repression against opponents, against anybody who disagrees with the current corrupt and authoritarian regime that Mr. Putin has built inside our country. And also on the parallel track, the rise in external aggressiveness, the rise in this sort of hostile, aggressive posture towards the outside world, and especially towards the world democracies led by the United States. So this is a process that is now entering its 3rd decade, and everybody knows what the main traits of the Putin regime are. Everybody knows that more than 6 years ago now, the leading political opponent of Vladimir Putin, former Deputy Prime Minister Boris Nemtsov, was gunned down literally in front of the Kremlin wall. And to this day, the organizers and masterminds of this assassination continue to enjoy full protection from the highest levels of the Russian state. We know that there are hundreds of political prisoners in our country today. Now, of course, most prominently, Alexei Navalny,
right.
The opposition leader who's now been incarcerated unlawfully in violation of the decision by the European Court of Human Rights for more than 100 days. And I've just checked this number before I went on your program. According to human rights groups, if we take the very narrow definition of a political prisoner as defined by the Council of Europe and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the number of political prisoners in Russia today stands at 382 people. Just to put things in context, in January of 1987, in the waning years of the Soviet Union, the Soviet government admitted the existence of about 200 political prisoners then. That was an underestimate, but so is this figure today. And the number of political prisoners in Vladimir Putin's Russia is already double what it was in the later years of the Soviet Union. And I certainly hope that when U.S. President Joe Biden has his planned summit meeting with Vladimir Putin later this summer, as is currently being talked about, that issue, the issue of the immediate release of political prisoners, will be at the top of the agenda.
So let me ask you really quickly about Alexei Navalny. Russian authorities, they're looking to add his group, Navalny's group, to a list of extremist organizations. His team has already shut down their nationwide offices. Do you believe that Navalny's political organization will be able to survive as a legitimate opposition group to Vladimir Putin?
Well, what's happening is very significant. So just a few days ago, as you pointed out, the Moscow prosecutor's office has suspended the activities of the Navalny organization. They have formally requested that the Moscow City Court designate these organizations as, quote unquote, extremist, putting them on par with groups such as ISIS, the Taliban, or Al-Qaeda. Remember, we're talking about a peaceful political movement whose methods include holding street demonstrations, supporting opposition candidates in elections, publicly investigating government corruption, including recently and prominently Vladimir Putin's $1.3 billion lavish Italian-style palace on the Russian Black Sea coast. So essentially, for the first time since the Soviet era, the Russian government is criminalizing political opposition. So anybody who dares to oppose the current oppressive and authoritarian regime is now equated with being a criminal. But look, they can shut down organizations. Right. They can declare what they want through the court systems or the prosecutorial decisions. But at the end of the day, they won't be able to do anything about the fact that there are millions of people in Russia, across Russia, who fundamentally reject Putin and Putinism, who want Russia to be a normal, modern, democratic European country. Vladimir Putin's party, United Russia, is down to 27% in a recent poll. That's 4 months away from a parliamentary election. That's shameful for a dictator who controls
Yeah, speaking of the parliamentary elections, just because we're running out of time, and I wanted to get this last question in. The next parliamentary elections, they're slated to take place, as you mentioned, in September. The next presidential election will be 2024. What do you think is the future of political, life under President Putin?
Well, of course, elections in Russia have long become meaningless rituals with predetermined results. Real opponents, for example, Alexei Navalny, are not allowed anywhere near the ballot. But of course, the growing problem for the Putin regime is that even in these circumstances, even when they have full control of the national media, full control of the political processes, full control of ballot access, and when they are able to disqualify real opponents from the ballot, even in these conditions, they're beginning to lose, because such are the growing protest sentiments in Russian society. Greater and greater numbers of people across Russia, especially the young generation, are saying enough is enough. It's not okay for one man to stay in power now into his third decade. And so, as we saw spectacularly 2 years ago in the Moscow City Council election, when even after disqualifying all the real opposition candidates, the pro-Kremlin, pro-regime candidates have lost in nearly half of the districts across Moscow. And they are terrified of this humiliation being repeated on the national level. So it's very important to emphasize that everything the Putin regime is doing, all this growing repression, is not a sign of strength. It's a sign of weakness, because they know that they're increasingly losing their grip on Russian society.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.